Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this panel on cooperation at digital age. So I'm very proud and happy to welcome on that stage for a second time in two edition Anne Cairns, Executive Vice Chairman of Mastercard. Ersek, CEO of Western Union for the first time, but I'm sure not the last. And Wim, I think you have the loyalty card here, so CEO of European Banking Federation. Before beginning, I think perhaps it will be silly for some of you in the audience, but we never really know exactly who is on stage. So I will ask you, all of you, 30 seconds, a bit more perhaps if necessary, to present a bit more what is your organization today with some key figures to remind everybody. So Anne, please.
Well, Laurent was teasing me and said I should just say, you know, red and orange.
That's them.
Yeah. So we're one of the world's biggest payment networks, and we work in almost 210 countries. We process about 75 billion transactions in real time on an annual basis, and we actually fraud check those transactions simultaneously in real time using artificial intelligence.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Ersek. We are a 170 years young company and innovating us every time. And we are moving like $300 billion every year in more than 200 countries, about 31 transactions every second. That's in 137 currencies. We do use also artificial intelligence when it comes to anti-money laundering, when it comes to settlement program, data security. And we recently opened our platform also besides Western Union, also to banks and other financial institutions. And we believe that we have a unique platform. We can serve the financial institutions in a different way.
Thank you. Wim?
I'm Mijs. I'm the CEO of the European Bank Federation. We represent 3,500 banks over 32 countries. And we have a Brussels office that deals with regulation, very closely involved in digital but also prudential supervision and anti-money laundering and financial education. And we have a Frankfurt office where we closely cooperate with ECB and our single supervisor in Frankfurt.
Thank you very much for this quick presentation. You kept the timing. So let's begin now. Everybody knows incumbents, large bank, financial institution have been doubtless disrupted by fintechs. But concretely speaking, what were the key factors? What was the wake-up call in your organizations that led you to transform and re-engineer your business? So perhaps the same question for all of you, and I will ask each again. So please, Anne.
Thank you, Laurent. Well, I think for us, obviously, when we saw the rise of e-com around the world, it was a huge wake-up call. And we saw companies like Uber start to gain massive mass market appeal, and obviously we wanted to be part of that. And it caused us to start developing all of the latest products in a digital form, to buy infrastructure such as digital gateways and so on. And then the next wave we saw was actually away from the card network into real-time bank-to-bank payments. And that caused us to buy things like VocaLink, the infrastructure of the UK, which is now used in many different countries in the world and is actually rolling out as I speak. And of course, with the rise of e-com came the rise of fraud. And that was what really drove us to buy artificial intelligence companies such as Brighterion, that we could embed the fraud tools from that into our global network and actually start to sell those fraud tools out to banks to actually reduce that as e-com really took off. So all of these things were connected.
Thank you. Ik made the same question.
Well, we learned a lot from FinTechs. We are still learning. The most thing we learned probably is entrepreneurship, challenging the current, being more active on the change. And big corporations like Mastercard or Western Union, it's hard to be entrepreneur and make the change happen. And you could say no to the fintech companies. You say, okay, ignore them or you cooperate with them. And we did many cooperations. The big ones were definitely our mobile money transfer part. It's our fastest growing business and been growing for years now, over 20%. And people use now in 75 countries. When I talk about countries, I'm talking really not only European Union, I'm really talking about the different countries worldwide. We recently launched, for instance, in India to send money, not to receive money, to send money out of India with mobile apps. And we learned from all FinTech environment. It makes us more agile. It makes us faster. It's, the meetings start with a best case from a FinTech company, how they have done, how they developed that, how they allocate their knowledge. And also, you know, you look at the market, can you or acquire, as you guys did it, or can you also hire talent? And obviously there is a lot of talent there. And so that's something keeps us on our toes. At the same time, one thing we gave back to the FinTech companies, there has been also, this is not tech fin, this is FinTech. It's an ecosystem that you have to consider being a FinTech company. It's not only creating in the corner offices a new idea, it's really understanding the voice of the customer. When I talk about the voice of the customer, that means a big word, but at the same time, really including 7.5 billion people globally and understanding their needs and creating that ecosystem has been probably our contribution to the FinTech companies. And this cooperation so far worked pretty well for us, and looking forward for more cooperations on that.
Wim, the same question.
Well, I've been in banking for 27 years, but I'm also a musician. And I must say that the change that I noted was the music industry. I have a studio in my house, which is 10 times more powerful than the ones that were in the 1970s, the 24-track studios. And if you saw the democratization by technology of music, but you also saw how the incumbents, how the record companies reacted to that challenge by keeping on. I had this clear nightmare that the banking industry would try to do the same. And the banking industry didn't, because indeed it adapted and realized very quickly that indeed customer preferences changed, but also that FinTechs take one part of your value chain, come up with a genius idea. Because indeed, in all these years of banking, one of the problems with big companies was this very rigid vertical matrix structure that you had for approval. And they taught us to be entrepreneurial even in a big company. They taught us to think outside of the box. And they brought us technology that our customers wanted. So in my job, the next step was, of course, look at the regulation. And I found that the regulatory environment was very, very good for the 1870s, but less good for 2020. So the next step is that we try to write a blueprint in which we could cooperate with FinTechs and banks. But indeed, if you look at the music industry, that was a serious wake-up call.
You know what I love about this, Laurent, is that, you know, Wim's immediately taking us outside the banking industry, and we're dealing with a regulator here, which is pretty novel. And one of the things that I'd been thinking of, because we'd been talking over in Davos last week about movies, and I was saying Blade Runner is my favorite movie, but it was made in the 1980s about what 2019 would be. And then you start to look at all of the technology that they invented in the 80s for this, and you've got video entry phones, you've got, you know, smart cities in a way, you've got autonomous vehicles, well, actually flying vehicles. You actually have, you know, voice-activated smart devices in the home that help you and so on. So a lot of the technology that we're using today was invented then. The only thing that distressed me about it was, of course, the main actresses, the female leads, they were all artificial intelligence. There wasn't any actual women, you know. Maybe that's the way we're going, Wim. You know, you'll have to regulate about that.
But what will we write songs about?
Just Hikmet and both of you are running networks. I mean, at the end of the day, Western Union, Mastercard, you have big networks. What working with fintechs or with incumbents, speaking of cooperation, what do you think are the key factors contributing to a greater cooperation ecosystem? Hikmet, perhaps.
We have to realize that everybody has on the chain, end-to-end chain, a room to play. We can't. The customer need starts in one point, ends in one point. It's not only sending money or it's doing a payment, or really understanding that eco chain and understanding that the customer decides what the eco chain is. If we come and say that I have the best idea, I'm going to disrupt the banks, or the banks will going to go after the fintech, it doesn't work like that. Everybody finds its place in this eco chain where it's, by the way, it's not defined once. It changes every day because needs of the customer changes every day. I'll give you an example. If you want to send money from San Francisco or from Paris to the rural area of Uganda, to Gulu, north Uganda, you have to combine the eco chain. You have to understand what the needs of the customer in Paris is, where the customer comes from, why did they collect the money, why the customer is sending the money, what's the data. You have to make the anti-money laundering. You have to collect that in euros. At the same time, you have to pay in Uganda to the customer who has the needs, wants to pay maybe the school fee of the children. And so it's a life-changing environment that the kid goes to a school, and then you have to settle the money with the banks. You have to do it real time. In that all space, and you do have to do anti-money laundering also in Uganda. You have to work with the law enforcement. You have to accept the regulator. You have to make a regulatory reporting because you are putting money into the country. Or you have to make a reporting to the ECB because money is moving. And all this chain, there is room for everyone. Western Union alone can't do that. Mastercard alone, with all respect, I don't know, and what you say, can't do that. Everyone has a space. And by the way, the fintechs could be also a regulatory fintech. It's not only, you don't see your business, what I'm seeing is that only making money, also supporting the chain, and you'll make automatically money on that part. You could be a part of the regulatory environment, you could be part of the settlement environment, you could be part of the artificial intelligence, knowing your customer database. So I think that's something that we have to live and understand, and that's very important.
So what you are saying is the value chain is big enough to have space for all kind of new players to play a role in it.
Well, this chain is huge. It's our life what we do. Sometimes we think that we give empower the people in Uganda and Gulu, give them all a wallet and it's done. It's not. The wallet, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I couldn't agree more, and I think a good example of this is that the chain extends so naturally into the real world. So, for example, in Africa, we're working with M-Copa to give solar panels to people. But people can't afford to buy solar panels just straight off the bat. It's too expensive for them. So how do you make that available? Then you actually link through into the chain that can do pay-as-you-go, that can do installments to pay for the solar panels. The solar panels give you the energy to charge your mobile phone through which you pay the installments. And so, you're actually extending the chain, as Hikmet says, and you're creating whole new chains in the ecosystem. I think the other thing is, obviously, with blockchain, you're reducing the steps in the chain at the same time. You can go bilaterally much more between different counterparties, and that's a pretty interesting thing. We've just built a platform with Microsoft that has 220 million companies loaded on there. And the idea is it will support trade everywhere in the world. And I could be a very tiny company on that platform. I could be an enormous company on that platform. But we can operate on the same platform and actually deal with each other, which is a very exciting way to go into the future.
that can revolutionize a lot, especially in these documentary credits. When I started at the bank, I was one day at the Department of Documentary Credits, 20 people who know of every bank, all the other 20 people. When I visited it 5 years ago, still 20 people who know everybody else. So indeed, by blockchain technology, you suddenly take out this trusted third-party certificate, and that is where you can get an enormous innovation in the chain.
Wim, as you have the microphone, already Hikmet mentioned before that in many senses they learn from fintech in some experience. With your banks, so many experience, you say hundreds of banks, thousands of banks members. Can you tell us a bit more about what financial institution you are representing did learn with the fintech rising of these last 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's not easy in a sense that they are so diverse, but I think that the availability of technology is available for all, and it's cheap. What you will see in Europe in the coming years is the different ways in which banks find their way. The big banks, no one have picked up. Last week I was at the new head office of ING, and it is very interesting. Instead of building it vertical like a tower, it is now a glass horizontal. And what is more interesting is it is completely glassed, and half of it is their head office, and the other half is given to fintech entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs who have immediate access. And it shows how this bank is adapting, and it's one example. Then you have Spanish banks adapting quickly, and indeed the CEO of one of them is coming today as well. But that doesn't mean that it is big banks only. I have small banks like Sella Bank in the north of Italy, a family bank who is completely digital already. So in my view, the way they are adapting is different. Big banks are usually trying to use the whole scale and all products and make them, improve them. Smaller banks are picking out the smart ways and finding their own place in the market. The only ones who are in the trouble are the ones that are not moving at all. And there are unfortunately those as well.
Would you say that the key word of what you learned, financial institutions learned, is open, work with others?
Yes, I would say open indeed. What doesn't work is a close inward looking. So many years ago, everybody can remember a bank very much. You could see it in the build of every banking office in the world. They would all use marble. They would all have small windows, and they would be inside looking. If you look at modern banking officers, it looks like a bloody aquarium.
I think the openness is really important. Obviously, I'm going to say that, Laurent, being at Mastercard. But I think it's really interesting in today's world when we're really trying to tackle huge things like the sustainability goals, climate change, gender equality. There's just no way that we can do that alone. It has to be through a massive number of partnerships to shift things on the planet. And I think it's really interesting that in the private sector, these partnerships are becoming more and more important at tackling these social issues, because meanwhile, in the government sector, we're seeing populist governments come into power, and we're seeing less cooperation on a global basis. So it's really the big global companies that are working across all of the markets and touching all the players in the markets through the value chains that can really help move forward.
Yes, that leads me to Hikmet. My understanding is cooperation, where you mention it, is not only with fintech. You do cooperation with Amazon, with big tech. So can you elaborate a bit about that?
Yeah, I think, again, it starts with people, ends with people. The money is moved with people and not in the places like Davos or Paris. We sometimes close our eyes and don't see the global world. And that's exactly what Amazon has done with us. Look, people today with the technology can buy goods globally from their mobile phones. If you are sitting in Paris, you can buy anything from Amazon or for the other e-commerce partners. But if you are in Colombia and you have only local cards with issued only in pesos, or you have in cash, you have an access to the global shop, but you can't finish your transaction because it's not it's a cross-border transaction. You have to do the anti-money laundering, you have to do the settlement, you have to do that. So Amazon came to us, said that, okay, we would like to access to different customer segments, which don't have the financial inclusion that we in Paris think everybody has it. Well, by the way, that's also one of the biggest mistakes that some of fintech companies do, that everybody is the same. It's not. There are different use cases. Amazon came to us, said that, okay, can you enable us that people can buy globally, shop locally? And that's exactly what happened. People in Colombia, for instance, are buying globally and pay in pesos locally, and we immediately, Amazon ships the purchase to them. And these are more partnerships like that. The other partnership is what we just recently announced is also with STC, Saudi Telecom Corporation. There are about, I believe, 25 or 27 million people in Saudi Arabia. 6 or 7 million people of them are migrants from, especially from Southeast Asia. And most of them have a telephone, and they issued wallets. And the wallets are full of, I mean, there's money on it, some purchase on it, right? $100, $200. And you send money from your mobile wallet immediately to Bangladesh or to Sri Lanka or to India, real time. And you think it's a Saudi Arabia telecom transaction, but effectively it's Western Union, white labeled by Western Union. So this cooperation, big cooperation, and really going to the last mile. And as Anne mentioned, the issues we have today is not, they don't have borders. You can't build a wall and saying that I'm solving this issue in a payment service industry and it's only there. The issues we have are global. So you have to respect that there are 7.6 billion people globally. Climate change doesn't have a border. You can't build a wall. You have to involve everyone. You have to give them this financial inclusion. You have to empower them by including in the Amazon shops. And that's what we have done with Amazon.
So when you speak of Amazon, that leads me to Wim. Same thing, a few years back, it would have been like science fiction thing that banks will partner with big tech and so on. And now in Europe, they partner with Apple and soon, I'm sure, with Google, like Citi is doing in the States. So do you see this mind shifting also in your organization?
Well, there is one thing about cooperating with fintechs, but cooperating with big techs is another one. And it's inevitable. See, I have Apple Pay on both my phones and I never take out my card anymore. And you see, but you also see the danger of being disintermediated. So it means that banks have to be awake if they cooperate. The access is fantastic. The innovation is fantastic. But indeed, if you look at big tech, sometimes I made a small overview of all the fintechs related to financial services that Amazon did. And it was a fun exercise. I came about 26 small fintechs who all did a little bit, either payments or credit scoring or loans. It was really brilliant. And then I connected all to Amazon, and what I saw was a serious financial institution emerging. So yes, there is a shift and it is inevitable. Their platform approach, the way they use data, the way they are able to reach, as said, literally every part of the planet is essential. But it also pushes to interesting questions to regulators and supervisors, is as if there are vague lines between big tech and banks, can you still regulate or supervise the banking sector, or should you supervise the services?
You know, Wim, you just mentioned data there, and I think it's a really hot topic because I think as a consumer, there's so much more fear really in the minds of consumers about what's my data being used for. I mean, I know that I experience it when I go on and I've suddenly been looking at a few holidays or something in some part of the world and suddenly I'm bombarded with emails. I think that we probably all are, with offers of things that I'd never even come across. So obviously somebody is tracking what I'm doing. And I think that it's at a tipping point now where that level of trust between the consumer and many different players is disappearing. And I think regulation definitely has a role. Obviously, Europe's been taking the lead on that. But it's not just regulation. I think we're there to solve it for the ecosystem.
You say something essential here, and indeed data are key, and we can talk about the general data protection regulation was different, but it's also important for our companies because we have an asset here. Interestingly, people may not like banks, but they trust them, and people may love fintechs, but they don't trust them. And that has to do, the key is that people trust the way we handle data, because for the last 100 years, they've always trusted that banks only ask the data that they need for a transaction and are not good in data analytics. So in working with big tech, this is one of the things that we should be thinking about and should be concerned of, because indeed, if we lose that trust, then we are really at low end, and we still have it, and I'm actually quite proud of it, and also proud of both your institutions, because you also have the public's trust on this.
Data is a key subject at Western Union, I assume.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's not easy if you're a small, if you work in a country like in France, you're from Morocco, and you maybe you left your country, you're hardworking, you make maybe 1,500 euros, and half of your salary goes back home, and you trust the corporation to give the $750. It comes there in the rural areas, that the money is in the hands of your family. It's a big feeling, it's emotional, and you are changing people's life. If you destroy that trust, is it via not delivering the money? Is it via not protecting your data? Is it via anti-money laundering, your brand trust? You can't give that up. That's hard work. You have to work hard for that. It's not easy to build trust. And you have to deliver the trust. And that's something that...
Is it something specifically difficult when you choose new company you cooperate with to be very careful not to have an incident with this new one, not to lose this trust? Because it's your brand.
Absolutely. What we do is that we do diligences, not only diligence on financial, obviously, when we work with company. We do ask the customer, would you, when we work with this company, would you trust that? We do diligence of the company structure. We do diligence on the people who own the company, because it's, you know, it's maybe it's sometimes some deals sound very sexy. You want to do it, but you really have to have the diligence. You have to apply the regulatory environment, because regulators are, you know, some of us blame the regulators. It's not true. They do protect. They do protect. And we have to respect that. And the easiest way to do that is you work with the regulators together, not against them. And that's something that we really changed at the Western Union. That was a big move for us.
That leads me to a question about regulation, but perhaps you wanted to react before.
Yeah, I just wanted to react and say, in order to sort of maintain the trust, you have to design the products that make people feel protected. And I think one of the big design challenges that's going on right now is in the whole digital ID environment. And we've been looking at it from the point of view of, don't build a monolithic system for digital ID. Actually, keep the information at what I would say the gold sources. So keep your passport information at the passport office, your driver's license information at the driver's license office, keep your national insurance number with the government, but create a system that can pull this information and encrypt it and tokenize it and aggregate it in order to be able to answer questions. Because if, say, I'm in America and I go to buy a bottle of wine or something, you know, the person in the supermarket's going to say, well, Anne, are you over 21? And I'm going to say, of course not. And then, of course, I may produce my driver's license to prove that I am. But with my driver's license, I'm showing somebody who I don't know not only how old I am, but where I live, and lots of information about me that they don't need to know. Really, what we want to do is design a digital ID system that gives people the minimum information, that gives them a yes-no answer to the question without disclosing any more about you, and putting the actual control of that into the hands of the consumer, so that you really know that you're protected and your data is protected.
Data and ID. You wanted to react?
Yes, because that is where governments and this idea of Anne is the way forward. I think that we all need safe IDs It is on the customer side to know that their data, their passport, their driving license are safely stored and not being used or abused. On one hand, it is also for money laundering purposes that we know, and all other fraud purposes, that we know that the person in front of us is actually the person he or she says he is. And this is where governments come in. I have great examples from the Baltic states, where and other countries as well, where they just test on the government system, and they just get a red flag. They get no further information, but it is aggregated and encrypted, and you just get a red flag. In other countries, there is an absolute cut. It is impossible to talk about using identification, using the government database for identification for other worlds. And then there is the third example, by the way, where governments use the bank data to identify people. But this needs to cooperate. This network needs to work because it's in the interest of society, not only of commercial entities.
Speaking of cooperation, you mentioned many times, all of you, regulation. Wim, I know you live in Brussels, you love regulators. Can regulatory and policymakers do more to help companies innovate, being fintech, by the way, or just you guys? I mean, do you think they can do something, perhaps cooperate between each other sometime, or?
Let's start by saying my deep belief is you cannot regulate innovation into being. That is the whole idea. To enable innovation by a regulation doesn't work. But the other way around does. The innovation will come from the entrepreneurs. It will come from the available technology. It will come from the creative brains. And what you can is create a regulatory environment in which you can foster this and in which you can fund this. And the example is always digital onboarding. See, there's nothing that puts me off more than when I open a bank account and I go through a full digital process, and at the end it says, now please print the contract, sign it with a pen and go to your nearest bank branch with your passport. And this is not necessary. That is just in local regulation. So one thing that we argue with the European Commission and others is, if you believe in a digital single market, if you believe this, enable it. That doesn't mean make it less safe, but make sure that the full process, the full customer journey is digital and available. Then you enable innovation which comes from the private sector.
Someone want to react on regulation?
Yeah, sure. Dealing daily. Obviously, we are regulated in 200 countries. And that's huge. You know, we have data from 170 countries, 170 million people worldwide, and these are different data of consumer data. So that's regulated. And thank God it's regulated because it protects the customer, first of all. However, one thing I would like to mention is also you could take the regulatory environment and be entrepreneurial and really create a business model out of that also. It's nothing wrong, by the way, for that. One of the things we have done is that we probably built one of the best anti-money laundering environment of the world. We use artificial intelligence. And the last years we spent more than $1 billion only on the regulatory environment because you are regulated in 200 countries. And we see that as a business model, a competitive advantage. First of all, protects the customer, trust. Secondly, is good for the business model. And thirdly, I believe that it also opens your communication to the regulator in a different environment. It will be great, by the way, if European Union has a harmonized anti-money laundering environment within the 27 countries. But, you know, it is what it is.
You will love that this is my personal strategic objective and the EBF strategic objective for 2020.
Still, there's another business
Sorry,
model.
you said 2020 or 2030? I didn't hear you well.
Yeah. I am ambitious, so 2020. And to answer your question, the political momentum is now because there is a widespread idea among the EU 27 and a half still, we're still in January. But there is a widespread concern and knowledge that undermining criminal activity is affecting society. And this means that we do not only need to harmonize our AML, but that we also have a financial stability problem and a society problem if we don't. So I completely agree, and I'm happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. Just one more thing add, if I may, if I have a minute. The other thing is also you really the regulators, as we corporations, have social responsibility. One of the most important thing besides remittances I like is that with our Western Union Business Solutions, we have the student pay. It's not easy to study abroad. It's not easy to apply for a university, Harvard or Oxford, when you live in China or when you live in India or Bangladesh, and your parent wants to pay the fee in local currency. So the regulatory allows us so you get easy visa to study there. So you can change the regulatory environment as a business model and really work with the regulators to enable the people to have a better life. And there, I believe it's a lot of room for the fintech companies, which we as a big corporations, I can't speak for the other Western Union, have sometimes trouble to enter the market. And we are looking to the fintech companies saying that show us where the gap in the chain is. Can we work something together? And that's something I'm very excited with work with the fintech companies.
Well, I mean, actually picking up on Hikmet's point, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention about women here, Laurent, that if you think about the women's market around the world, 85% of day-to-day buying decisions everywhere in the world are made by women, 85%. So if you are in the payments area of the business, you have to recognize this and think about designing products and services with women in mind. And it will make you much more powerful and successful. I think, now we're moving to an era, today, 40% of the world's wealth is in the hands of women, and it's projected to be 50% by 2025. That's a huge shift. A massive shift from previous times. And the wealth managers are waking up to this because there have been very few that have actually focused on developing funds directed at women, given financial advice to women, although they're going to be owning half of the world's wealth. And then it's the idea of reaching women in emerging markets, which is where digital identity comes in. But also there are 111 million companies around the world today that are owned by women. Many, of course, in the SME space, as you'd expect. This is a hugely open environment that's pretty much unbanked and a great area, a great B2B area for fintechs to move into. And I think what we will see is the rise of fintechs around the world that address all of these issues and are going to present absolutely compelling business case to actually change the world and the way that we're working today, because too much of the world's been designed without women in mind and without women involved. And the last thing I'll say about that is the recent data on artificial intelligence is coming out so clearly on that. The Institute of Technology in America published showing that if you were non-Caucasian for the American algorithms, you had a 10 to 100 times more likely prospect of being identified wrongly as a false positive, which means you could be picked up in a line out for doing something that you didn't do. And I think this is something that we all have to address, big companies and small companies, because we will be living in an artificial intelligence world.
Artificial intelligence just reproduce what the people who are programming bias. But that leads, it's a very important point, by the way. Tomorrow we have many sessions on women in finance, some led by Mastercard, but also Women in Finance Track and Women in Finance Lunch with you. Thank you very much for helping us on that very important subject. Globally speaking on women, but also on emerging market, as you discussed, and you are very present in this market, Hikmet. Do you think, is the finance industry guilty of neglecting a large portion of the world's population? And how can financial innovation become more inclusive, not only just giving us a new UX user experience or whatever, but just include more people around the world and give them more power and so on? Your feedback, perhaps.
Well, the political environment is against it. The protectionism, what's happening currently, it's not good. I just tell you, the building walls doesn't help. If people are connected, if people move, good things happen. If people move, people are connected, money moves, jobs are created, people go to school, people buy, women have the capability to go shop, and the political environment created, protective environment, what's happening today, I believe it's not good, but my hope is that the globalization is taking only a break. I think the globalization, a new form, it's getting a new form. I call that as empowered globalization, empowered to 7.6 billion people, because it's very simple. As you mentioned earlier, they are connected via mobile phones. If you do FaceTime with anyone today, an Indonesian furniture producer is doing FaceTiming with a Canadian importer and selling the goods, you can't stop that anymore. You can't stop with trade wars. You can't stop with wars to avoid that globalization. And that this financial producer has to be included in the payment system. Otherwise, this guy in Indonesia won't create jobs. The wealth won't be distributed. And the rich people will sit on their money, and they are going to be against distribution in the ecosystem. So that's...
So you do think, even with what we see, sorry to say, but in your country, but also in Europe with Brexit, also in many other countries, I mean, it's not really opening right now. You do think it's just a break?
Well, no. Well, what we see in Africa, for instance, our business in intra-Africa, because people are always looking for trade, is growing by 20%. Intra-Africa, from Ghana to Gabon, from Gabon to Senegal, from Senegal to Uganda, from Uganda to South Africa, Tanzania, it's growing 20%. They're trading, they're moving, and they're connected. Good things are happening. People are going more to school because of trade. If you close the border, they won't have the opportunity. And
yeah, and I think Hikmet is absolutely right. But the other thing I'd say is I was listening to Satya Nadella last week from Microsoft, and he was being asked about an East-West divide in technology and the advent of 5G and so on. And what he said was, look, let's face it, we are all going to be in the same boat when we're trying to fight against cybercrime. And really, we're going to need some cooperation like a Geneva Convention to do this. And I thought it was quite an interesting point. And I think it goes with Hikmet's point of we're all connected, whether you like it or not, whatever the governments are doing, you're not going to stop this because of technology.
It's inevitable. I believe that. I like the fact that just at the end of the time you open a new panel for Laurent. But to say something on cyber, this is absolutely true. And one thing on the cooperation thing is what's clear is that FinTech has taught us to be fast and agile in adapting to changes. But on cybersecurity, we have a big problem, but you see the cooperation now coming, and that is extremely necessary. Because if you, I have my director of cybersecurity and innovation here, and if we talk about the threats, then you don't sleep very well at night. So there is where cooperation is really, really needed.
Thank you very much. I'm quite happy to see that so big organizations are so open to discuss and open the boundaries, while today some other governments are not so open, but at least in the business side we continue to open the doors. Thank you very much to all of you. You can applaud them.